I never thought that my only son's wedding toast would be the moment he stripped me of respect in front of 200 guests. At my son Marcus's wedding inside the Four Seasons Ballroom in downtown Atlanta, he raised his glass and joked that I'd finally made it out the projects in heels, and while laughter rippled across the ivory room, I just smiled, walked out with my clutch still zipped, and left him to bask in the applause. I didn't trip on the hem of my navy dress. I didn't cry in the hallway. I pressed the elevator button with a calm finger and counted each second like it mattered. Marcus didn't follow. Nobody did. Outside, the valet asked if I wanted my car brought around. I told him no, I needed air. Not another set of eyes asking if I was okay. Because I was. Not broken, just done. The moment hit harder than I expected. Marcus and Simone had spent 6 figures on that wedding, and yet somehow my seat at the table came with a side of mockery. I hadn't asked for applause. I paid for her dress. I kept the lights on during his bar exam prep when he couldn't work full-time, and I had smiled through every half-truth he fed Simone's family to polish his image. I played the background. I let him speak over me. But that toast? That was a choice. The dig wasn't clever. It was precise. He wanted to put me back in my place. Remind me where he thought I came from, and where he believed I didn't belong. Not at the table. Not on the paperwork. Not in the legacy. I took a lift back to the Midtown condo he didn't know I owned, poured myself a glass of wine, and opened my laptop. The sale agreement was waiting, final contract from the buyers in Sandy Springs, fully vetted by James Caldwell. I scrolled past the balance transfer details and down to the line Marcus never saw coming. Title held by Harrison Lowe Holdings, LLC, sole managing member Celeste Lowe. My name. No cosigner, no junior suffix, just mine. I clicked Confirm Transfer and entered the authorization code. The property was gone. Sold. 2 days earlier, Friday, November 3rd, I'd wired $2.4 million to finalize the sale of the family property under Harrison Lowe Holdings, a real estate LLC Marcus never knew I controlled. I'd been planning it quietly for months. Ever since that uneasy phone call in July when Marcus claimed our Forest Park tenants had stopped paying rent, yet I found no delinquency notices in the portal. Just a gap. Then another. Then a reroute. That was when I pulled the first thread. Now, 3 months later, I sat at a private desk in the SunTrust Midtown Executive Branch, handing over the completed closing documents to Deandra Milton, my banker, while she verified the wire amount line by line. She didn't rush. I liked that about her. She treated every comma like a decimal might explode if placed wrong. Once she double-checked the account routing and uploaded the clearance certificate from the buyer's attorney, she slid me a receipt to sign, official, stamped, time-logged. Final transfer completed at 1:43 p.m., she said, glancing over the edge of her glasses. Good, I replied. No grin, no small talk, just the kind of satisfaction that sinks in slow when you've spent years pretending not to see what's yours being misused. That property off Auburn Avenue was my first true asset. My name wasn't on the front gate, but I had poured the down payment into the soil when Marcus was barely out of college. Back then, I'd let the LLC operate under his name for optics, for credit lines, for the ease of passing inspections. But I always kept one clause buried in the structuring documents, one clause that allowed me to shift managing control if the original signatory was compromised, incapacitated, or proven in breach of fiduciary duty. He never read past page 3. I had the clause notarized in 2016, filed separately from the master LLC agreement. James helped me craft it, discreetly, legally, and without leaving a trail Marcus could sniff out. That Friday, the clause activated. With breach confirmed, authority transferred. The wire cleared. I walked out of the bank owning every square inch of the decision Marcus thought he controlled. And for once, I didn't feel like explaining a damn thing. Marcus had been carving at my dignity for years, one casual insult at a time, but the wound finally bled when I learned he tried to steal from me. It didn't start with the forged power of attorney. It started small, back when Simone first joined the picture. He'd tell her friends that I'd barely finished high school, as if education was the sole measure of worth, as if my 2 decades running rental units from a spiral notebook didn't build his foundation. He used to correct me in front of contractors, smiling while doing it, a slick habit meant to shrink me without ever raising his voice. "Mom gets mixed up on paperwork," he'd say, and everyone would nod politely, assuming I was just some sweet woman lucky to have a smart son keeping things in order. During our house meetings, he'd insist on running the agenda, cutting me off mid-sentence when I questioned an expense. Once, after I asked about the rising maintenance fees on the Westview units, he put his hand on mine and whispered, "Don't worry about the numbers, Mom. You've done enough." That tone, the one meant to sound gentle but carried the authority of ownership, had become his favorite weapon. The final straw came on an ordinary Thursday morning. I'd been reviewing quarterly statements with Deandra when she paused mid-page. "Celeste, this signature doesn't match your current authorization record," she said, tilting the screen. It was a scanned power of attorney form with my name typed in elegant font, my signature copied from a 2018 document, pasted neatly under a date from 3 weeks earlier. My stomach tightened. She didn't need to tell me who sent it. Marcus had used that exact file name before, POA.clofinal.pdf. He'd tried to transfer title on my Decatur duplex, my steady income property since 2005, straight into the company ledger under his name. He didn't even bother to change the notary date. I sat there in that glass-walled office staring at the fake ink that pretended to be mine, feeling every second of foolish trust I'd extended to him collapse. By noon, I called James Caldwell. His voice came calm as a metronome. "Don't confront him yet. We'll verify everything first." And that was the moment I stopped being Marcus's mother. In business, I became his adversary. After James Caldwell confirmed the forgery, I revoked Marcus's financial access before his coffee could cool. James didn't need long. He pulled the metadata from the forged PDF, traced the IP address back to Marcus's home office, and found the original document it had been lifted from, an old leasing form from 2018 I'd signed during a tenant dispute. Same pen stroke, same smudge near the L in low. From a legal standpoint, it was textbook fraud. No ambiguity, no gray zone to slither through. Once the verification was done, James drafted the revocation letters on his firm's letterhead and filed the financial disengagement clauses at the Fulton County Clerk's office while I waited on the line. That same afternoon, October 27th, I went into full lockdown. I didn't send warnings. I didn't hint or stall. I executed. Deandra and I met at SunTrust's Midtown branch in a back office where we had logged dozens of transactions before, only this time, the tone had changed. She logged into the joint investor dashboard while I stood over her shoulder. One by one, we stripped Marcus's credentials from every co-managed account. Commercial, residential, holding, even the legacy trust. Anywhere he had viewing rights or transfer power, it was gone by the time the clock hit 4:15 p.m. "That's the last one," she said, clicking submit on the final freeze request. I had her print physical receipts for each update and staple them into a file I'd labeled with the date in red marker. Control wasn't symbolic. It had to be provable. Next came the trusts. I had 3. One, for long-term rental income. One holding insurance disbursements from the fire in 2014. And the third, newest, meant to be Marcus's eventual inheritance. James submitted the amendment requests via secure portal, invoking the discretionary clause that allowed me to reposition the trustee role under conditions of misconduct, misrepresentation, or breach of duty. He used those exact words in the affidavit. The changes processed by end of business. By sundown, Marcus didn't own access to a single account with my name on it. Not even read only. He didn't know it yet, but the doors were already shut behind him. By Monday morning, everything had moved from private action to official record. James filed the cease and desist and submitted the fraud report to Fulton County Records before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. His email arrived at 8:17 a.m., subject line in all caps, Marcus Lowe, fraud notice and property, holding alert. Attached were 2 documents, one addressed to Marcus directly, citing unauthorized representation of a managing member, The other, a formal fraud submission referencing the forged power of attorney, stamped received by the county clerk's office. The tone was neutral, clinical, almost cold. That was what I wanted. No family drama, no narrative, just facts that held weight in a courtroom if needed. James called 10 minutes later to confirm that the clerk had processed the filing. This places the property under observation, he explained. If he tries to move anything, money, title, leasehold, collateral, it will trigger a verification request. It's a tripwire now. His precision soothed me. He never used words like maybe or we'll see. Every sentence ended in a verb that closed a door. Meanwhile, Deandra handled the financial perimeter. She scheduled what the bank calls a certified lockout, complete removal of an individual from all company-related bank authorizations, including indirect access through business subaccounts. It required signatures from both the bank's compliance officer and an external auditor to satisfy fiduciary protocol. She walked me through every step, printing a verification slip after each authorization was voided. Once this goes through, he can't even view balances or transaction logs, she said, sliding the papers across the table for my initials. It's as if his name never existed in our system. By 2:30 p.m., the lockout order was signed, notarized, and queued for overnight processing. Deandra emailed me a summary packet, 21 pages of updated account hierarchies and signature matrices. I saved 3 copies, one printed, one on a flash drive, and one uploaded to my encrypted drive under the folder Marcus Audit Restricted. It was the first afternoon in months when I could feel my breathing even out. Power doesn't return in a single moment. It rebuilds through paperwork, through signatures, through proof that no one else holds your keys anymore. On Sunday, November 5th, just after noon, Deandra texted me a PDF Marcus had emailed her titled Property Consolidation Doc that looked like desperation wrapped in arrogance. She kept the message brief. Thought you should see this. Came in last night, 10:41 p.m. Let me know if you want it flagged. The file wasn't even password protected. I downloaded it while sitting in my kitchen, phone propped against a coffee mug, and opened the document with a flat calm I'd trained into myself over decades of managing properties and people. I knew what I was about to see wouldn't surprise me. Still, the laziness of it did. He'd taken an old deed transfer from 2009, the one we filed after refinancing the Stone Mountain triplex, and crudely overlaid new information. Parcel numbers changed, property address swapped, title date updated, but the signature? Mine. Same slanted C and fading loop on the E that I hadn't used in over a decade. No updated notary stamp. No witness fields. The digital edits were so sloppy you could still see the ghosted pixels from the original county watermark bleeding through. He hadn't even bothered to change the font on the section headers. Just dragged new text boxes over the old lines and hoped it would pass. That kind of carelessness wasn't just offensive. It was telling. Marcus still believed charm would carry him further than due process. He thought he could flash a little legalese in a fake form and get someone like Deandra to sign off without blinking. That used to work. Not anymore. I forwarded the PDF to James with the subject line, Received from Banker, Verify Metadata. Within the hour, he responded with a breakdown showing the document's creation date, IP origin, and embedded edit history. It was last modified on November 3rd, 2 days after I revoked all access. That alone was enough to qualify it as attempted fraud, not just a clerical mistake. I replied, confirming grounds to escalate? He wrote back one sentence, absolutely. I saved the file to my case folder, flagged it as Exhibit C, and sent Deandra a formal request to log the attempted submission under unauthorized access protocols. Let Marcus keep his email trail. I was keeping receipts. I opened the original deed from my encrypted drive and matched it line by line against the fake Marcus had emailed to Deandra. There was no contest. My version, the real one, was time-stamped, notarized in person at the DeKalb County Records Office in 2009, and sealed with the state's embossed emblem across the lower left margin. I'd scanned and archived it myself after the refinance on the Stone Mountain triplex, back when Marcus was still calling me for advice, before making even the smallest move. His forgery used that same file, cropped and distorted, with a fresh date layered on top in an ugly sans serif font that didn't even match the original's formatting. It was the kind of oversight you catch when you've handled as many legal documents as I have. The moment I saw the notary field, blank, save for a pasted name that didn't appear in the state commission registry, I knew what I had. I cross-checked the name anyway. Georgia maintains an online notary database, and in under 5 minutes I had the confirmation. No one by that name had ever held a commission in the state. The signature was fabricated. The file had been modified on Marcus's work laptop, using a low-tier PDF editor that left a clear digital footprint in the metadata. James had already pulled the log, timestamps, user ID, version history, even the software license. It was all there, and it was all Marcus. What struck me wasn't just the deception, it was the casualness of it. He doctored a legal document in under 24 hours and fired it off to a banker who'd known me for 8 years, as if history didn't matter, as if professionalism could be overridden by pressure and pretense. That told me everything I needed to know about where his head was. He wasn't strategizing, he was spiraling. I saved both documents to the secure drive, one labeled Original Deed 2009.pdf, the other Forgery MLO November 2023.pdf. Then I emailed James again, this time attaching a notarized affidavit verifying the authenticity of my version, which we'd quietly prepared last year when we began insulating assets. The paper trail was no longer a precaution. It was my weapon. That night, my phone rang just after 10:30. Marcus. No warning, no message first. Just his name pulsing on the screen like a dare. I answered. He skipped the greetings. Why the hell am I locked out of the portal? His voice was tight, controlled on the surface but already splintering underneath. I stayed silent long enough to make him repeat himself. Mom, I'm asking you a direct question. There was no please, no trace of the man I'd hoped he'd grow into. Only entitlement, sharpened now by panic. Why did you send Deandra a forged deed? I asked. My voice didn't rise. I didn't accuse. I asked a clear question because I already knew the answer, and I wanted to hear how he'd lie. What? What are you even talking about? He almost laughed, like I'd suggested something absurd. That document was a draft, for review. I didn't even sign anything. You pasted my signature from a 2009 refinance and attached a false notary name that doesn't exist in the state of Georgia. The pause on the other end stretched for 5 full seconds. Then, the pivot. This is exactly why I didn't want you handling the back end. You get paranoid. You think every adjustment is some kind of attack. That wasn't an adjustment, it was fraud. He didn't deny it. He didn't offer an apology. He just switched tones again, this time dragging out a tired mix of frustration and false pity. You're letting that lawyer of yours fill your head with poison. You're turning this into a war over paperwork, and you're going to destroy everything we built. I leaned back in my chair, let him ramble for another 30 seconds. About family, about how Simone's parents would take my side if I kept this up, about what it would look like if word got out. Then I ended it with one line. This conversation is being recorded. Click. The call dropped. Not even a goodbye. I saved the recording file to my encrypted drive, tagged it with the timestamp, and added it to the case folder with the rest. Let him talk legacy all he wanted. He'd already rewritten his. The next morning, I pulled out the rental income ledger from July, something I hadn't intended to revisit, but now couldn't ignore. Every entry had been logged through our East Point properties, 4 units, each fully leased, no payment lapses. The monthly gross should have been $11,500, but the deposit line showed only $2,750 reaching the company account. The rest, $8,750, was rerouted, not delayed, not held for maintenance, redirected into a private entity, ML Strategic Holdings, LLC. I hadn't authorized that LLC, hadn't even heard the name, until I cross-checked it with Georgia's corporate registry. Registered in May. Marcus listed as CEO. mailing address tied to a co-working space in Buckhead. No partners, no board, just him. It wasn't a mistake, it was structure. He'd carved off a portion of our portfolio and used the rental income to bankroll something separate, off record. I didn't know what he was funneling toward yet, but the method was clear. He'd been treating our company as a buffet, grabbing what he wanted under the assumption I wouldn't notice what went missing as long as the light stayed on. The confirmation didn't come from the ledger, though. It came from Simone, indirectly. A few weeks earlier, she'd accidentally sent me a screenshot from a group chat meant for someone else. I hadn't deleted it. I didn't even respond. Just stared at it and archived it under my folder named Marcus Comms. In the image, Marcus was texting someone named Troy, boasting about how he was, quote, cleaning up mom's mess one ledger at a time. Cleaning up. Like my decades of work were a spill on the floor of his future. Like the time I spent waking up at 4 a.m. to meet electricians and city inspectors was something he needed to fix. The arrogance stung less than the familiarity. That's how he'd always reframed my contribution. Necessary, but flawed. Present, but unprofessional. I was the messy origin story he thought he had outgrown. I printed the ledger, marked the discrepancy in red, and added the screenshot from Simone as supplemental proof. Exhibit D. Not just theft, intent. The bomb dropped Monday morning when James called to confirm what the title trace had uncovered. Marcus had listed one of our properties as collateral for a private loan. Not just any property, but the undeveloped Bankhead rental lot we'd held for over a decade. A corner parcel that had appreciated steadily with each new transit expansion. We'd agreed years ago to keep it unleveraged. No tenants, no construction, just equity and patience. It was supposed to be our long-play exit asset. He'd used it to secure a $400,000 short-term loan, high interest, 12-month term, from a private lender out of Miami. No lien alerts had shown up because the filing had been buried through a secondary holding company, with Marcus listed as the sole officer. He used a shell entity to wrap a legitimate title and passed it off as his personal stake. No trace of my name. No documentation connecting it to Harrison Lowe Holdings. Just a silent grab. James walked me through the chain of custody. The lender had required proof of management control. Marcus submitted a fabricated corporate resolution claiming he held 100% of voting power. It wasn't just misrepresentation. It was willful, documented fraud. James's voice didn't waver, but I could tell he was walking slower than usual on the phone, buying time between phrases to check his words. I asked where the money went. He already knew. Marcus had invested the full amount into a luxury cigar lounge downtown, a venture I hadn't heard a single word about until that morning. According to the business filing, it opened soft launch last week. Photos were already up on Instagram. High-gloss floors, monogrammed humidors, floor-to-ceiling velvet drapes. The captions were all hashtags and bravado. Legacy luxury, young kings, built not bought. But the LLC's operating funds? Built on lies. I stared at the screen, watching a video clip of him cutting a ribbon with a gold-plated cigar cutter, smiling like he'd earned it. Like none of this came from stolen trust and a forged resolution. I downloaded the full loan file, saved every image, every transfer confirmation. Exhibit E. He didn't just gamble our property. He made it the foundation of his ego. By mid-morning, I had 2 calls on hold. One with the HOA board president at Monarch Gate, and another with the Georgia Department of Revenue. I didn't bother ranking them. Both needed to happen. Both would leave marks. The HOA call came first. I filed a formal asset misuse claim against Marcus, citing breach of fiduciary duty and unauthorized encumbrance of communal assets. The Bankhead lot wasn't inside Monarch Gate, but his position on the HOA board, secured by our company's ownership of 2 nearby properties, required disclosure of any high-risk leverage tied to affiliated parcels. He hadn't disclosed the loan, let alone the shell company. I forwarded the title transfer, the fake resolution, and a screenshot of the lender's lien placement. The president, a retired bankruptcy attorney, said flatly, "That's grounds for a forced removal vote." I told him to proceed. Then I turned to the Department of Revenue. I submitted a tip through their formal whistleblower intake portal, attaching income ledgers and flagged bank activity showing discrepancies between reported rental income and actual deposits. Marcus had filed underreporting on the 2023 K1s, claiming $38,000 in annual take-home from the East Point units, when the gross receipts alone were over $130,000. I uploaded the ledger entries, tax filings, and routing logs into the portal, then submitted a signed affidavit verifying their accuracy. I didn't embellish, I didn't need to. The numbers betrayed him. It felt different this time. Less about revenge, more about realignment. I wasn't blowing up our business. I was holding it steady before it collapsed under his weight. Marcus had always treated compliance as optional, as if charm and urgency could outrun audit flags. But this wasn't the kind of mess that could be smoothed over with a call to a friend at the county. This was structural, recorded, time-stamped, traceable. The confirmation emails came in within the hour, one from the HOA board secretary acknowledging the claim and scheduling a vote for next Thursday, the other from the Department of Revenue confirming intake of the report under case IDGRD 11058894. He thought he'd mastered the system, but he forgot I built the ground he walked on. That night, the house was too quiet, the kind of stillness that amplifies everything. Your breath, your thoughts, your past. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't open the window. I just sat in my bedroom, the old framed deed from Oglethorpe Avenue in my lap, like a photograph from another life. It was the first property I ever bought. 1996, 2-bedroom, 1 bath, peeling paint and plumbing that whined like it was haunted. But it was mine. I used to keep the deed tucked in a lockbox under the bed, afraid someone might question whether I really owned something so solid. After Marcus was born, I started keeping it visible, framed on the wall, hung just above my dresser, not for decoration, but as proof that what we had came from somewhere. I let him sign on at 25, not because he earned it, not because he understood the risk, but because I wanted him to feel invested. I thought if he had his name on something real, he'd respect the process. He'd treat it as legacy, not leverage. I remember the day he added his signature. We stood at the notary's desk, and he grinned like he was receiving a crown. I called it a milestone. Now I call it the beginning of a slow erasure. He'd used that access to position himself as the architect of everything. Told Simone's family he brought me in. Told brokers I didn't like meetings. Let people assume I was a silent partner. And I let it go because I thought it was temporary. A stage he'd grow out of. I didn't see how permanent it was becoming until it was already routine. Looking at that deed now, I didn't feel pride. I felt tired. Not defeated, but bone-deep weary from carrying both the weight of the work and the weight of being diminished inside it. I had believed that legacy could be shared, that trust could transfer like title. But you can't bequeath character. That has to be built, choice by choice. I set the frame down, took out my phone, and updated my estate directive. Marcus was no longer a beneficiary. By 8:10 a.m. on Monday, I was sitting across from James in his office at Caldwell and Stokes, a fresh legal pad in front of me, no pleasantries exchanged. The decision had already been made. I didn't come for advice. I came to execute. I want an emergency board session, I said, before he could even open his laptop. Formal. In person. All managing partners present. This week. James didn't blink. Which location? SunTrust Corporate Conference Center. Midtown. I want a neutral setting. Glass walls. Security on standby. I don't want him twisting this into a family issue. This is business. He nodded once and began typing. Within minutes, he drafted the board notice, a certified call for an extraordinary session under Clause 6.3 of our operating agreement, which allowed for emergency action in the event of gross misconduct or imminent harm to company assets. It required at least 3 partners to be present. There were 5 on paper: myself, Marcus, Malik Rowe, Yvonne Baines, and Greg Stanton. I trusted 2 of them. That was enough. The email went out at 9:02 a.m., followed by certified hard copies couriered to Marcus's registered address and office suite. No room for claims of ignorance or missed calls. The session was scheduled for Tuesday, November 6th at 2 p.m. to review findings related to financial misrepresentation, unauthorized collateralization, and document forgery. James made sure the wording was clinical but unambiguous. Then came the prep. I pulled every piece of documentation into one hard copy folder, exhibits A through E, notarized and tabbed. I added call logs, transaction screenshots, rental income statements, and a printout of the Luxury Cigar Lounge's LLC filing. We included the fake deed metadata report, the falsified corporate resolution, and the Department of Revenue intake confirmation. By the time we finished assembling the file, it was nearly 2 inches thick. "I don't want a confrontation," I told James, standing to leave. "I want closure." "You'll get both," he said, handing me the folder. Outside, the air bit sharp against my face as I stepped onto Peachtree Street. I had 24 hours to settle the business I built, and I was finally the one calling the meeting. At 2:06 p.m. sharp on Tuesday, I walked into the glass-walled boardroom at the SunTrust corporate offices, wearing a charcoal suit I'd had tailored 3 years ago, but never worn. It fit like I had grown into it. The table was long, sleek, and unforgiving, just the way I wanted it. I set the manila folder down at the head seat, opened it with deliberate calm, and began arranging the tabs: forged deed, altered ledger, title misappropriation, fake resolution, and the Department of Revenue claim. No performance, just documentation. Paper had more weight than any apology Marcus could bring. Yvonne arrived first, nodding once before taking a seat 2 chairs down. Greg followed, thumbing through the email on his phone, eyes careful. Malik came in last among them, no tie, just the same quiet steadiness he'd always brought. No one made small talk. They'd read the materials. They knew what this was. Marcus walked in at 2:17, 11 minutes late, wearing a powder blue blazer like it was still his brand launch party, not the unraveling of his steak. He smelled of some new cologne, loud and expensive, and wore that same smirk he leaned on when the ground started shifting, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not today. You're looking official," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. I didn't reply. Instead, I passed out the first set of copies, bank statements showing the redirected East Point income, alongside the ledger he edited. Then the WhatsApp screenshot from Simone's accidental message. Nobody looked at him yet, just the pages. Next, I handed around the doctored deed, highlighted metadata, invalid notary, overlay text inconsistencies. Then the cigar lounge documents, loan terms, title trace, business registration, Instagram images. Finally, the formal revocation of his access and the fraud filings. His posture changed by the 3rd tab, chin lower, fingers tightening around the chair edge. I watched it happen with a strange calm, like observing weather move through glass. "This is what's been hidden under your management," I said. "I brought the facts. Now we vote." I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. He was the one who looked like he wanted to leave. I began with the ledger. Everyone had a copy, their pages marked with red tabs and marginal notes I had annotated myself the night before. I pointed to the July rent diversion, then the August repeat. "This isn't an accounting error," I said, turning the page. "This is systematic rerouting. Unauthorized, undocumented, and concealed." Next came the WhatsApp message. "He called it cleaning up my mess," I said, letting the words sit. But what he cleaned out was over $50,000 in just 3 months. Greg shifted in his seat. Yvonne took a slow breath. Malik kept his eyes on the printouts, nodding once when I moved to the next item. I passed around the Photoshop deed next, every flaw already circled. Altered font layers, metadata inconsistencies, and a forged notary ID that didn't appear in any Georgia registry. This document was submitted to SunTrust under the title Property Consolidation Doc. It is not consolidation, it's attempted theft. Marcus didn't interrupt. His jaw tightened, but he sat silent, trying to look composed while his name kept sliding further off the ledgers and into liability. Then, the title trace. I laid out the bankhead parcel, the collateral agreement, and the LLC tied to the cigar lounge. He leveraged company property, held under Harrison Lowe for a private venture, without partner consent, without board review, with a fake resolution. I passed around the loan documents, highlighting the signature block his name alone, under a fabricated board authorization. The Instagram post was just salt, but necessary. "This is where the money went," I said, flipping to the image of Marcus at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, smiling with a cigar between his fingers like the emperor of something real. No one asked questions. The air was too still. It was the kind of silence that follows clarity, not confusion. Finally, I handed out the revocation clause, Section 9.1 of the partnership agreement. James had highlighted the language. "Malicious misrepresentation and fiduciary breach shall constitute grounds for share dissolution by majority vote." When Deandra confirmed via statement that the accounts had been misused, and James read that clause aloud, Marcus stood abruptly. "You're ruining my legacy," he said. His voice cracked, not with rage, but disbelief. Malik didn't hesitate. "I vote to dissolve his shares," he said. The moment Malik cast his vote, the balance shifted. It wasn't loud, not dramatic, just a clean, professional line drawn in ink between what we had been and what we were now. Yvonne followed, quiet but firm, stating for the record that Marcus had demonstrated, quote, "willful negligence and a disregard for partner trust." Greg hesitated, glanced across the table at me, then gave a slow nod. "I vote yes," he said, almost under his breath, but it was enough. 3 out of 4. Majority reached. Marcus didn't sit back down. He stayed on his feet, hovering behind his chair, like a man deciding whether to argue or leave. The room didn't give him either option. James handed the dissolution packet across the table, each page already marked with the clauses we'd cited. Marcus didn't take it. He just stared down at the folder like touching it would make it more real. "You always wanted control," he said, voice lower now. "This was your plan from the start, wasn't it?" I didn't respond. I didn't owe him anything. Not an answer. Not comfort. Not another second of pretending his manipulations were misunderstandings. At 4:17 p.m., James handed me the final signed authorization for immediate revocation of access, office keys, property site privileges, back-end portal rights, even his company email. Greg walked the document to the building's legal compliance officer himself to ensure the update triggered by end of day. Marcus was now officially removed from Harrison Lowe Holdings, not suspended, not stepping back, removed. The email went out company-wide at 4:33 p.m., citing irregularities in financial practices and immediate restructuring for compliance and fiduciary integrity. We didn't name him. We didn't have to. Every staff member who'd watched me shrink in meetings knew exactly who it meant. At 4:49, I received a text from Simone. "I'm sorry for everything." No emoji, no excuses, just words that weighed more than I expected. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. Apology couldn't restore what was taken, not just money, but time, trust, the quiet erosion of a role I'd built and protected. But still, I let the message sit there, unread but not deleted. By 4:17 p.m., Marcus was out, on paper, on record, and on notice. But the real severing came in the layers beneath the filings, the spaces where silence now replaced access. His building keycards were deactivated immediately. James forwarded me confirmation from the office property manager. Entry denied at all Harrison Lowe properties and workspaces. The Midtown access log showed his badge had last been scanned the day before. It would never scan again. I watched the back-end portal dashboard as the permissions updated in real time. Marcus's username grayed out, his profile photo disappearing like it had never been there. The final red lock icon appeared beside his email, marking the account as terminated. Deandra sent me a confirmation at 5:02, subject line, "Final lockout complete." She didn't include a note, just a secure PDF showing the changes. That was her style. Quiet, efficient, thorough. Greg issued the company-wide email. Restructuring was the word we settled on. Clean, non-accusatory. But the line about preserving the integrity of Harrison Lowe's founding vision made it clear something had ruptured. No one asked questions. No one needed to. Every office has a tension people learn to navigate. Ours had just shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I sat at my kitchen counter with the manila folder still unopened from the meeting, poured a glass of water, and watched the blue light blink on my phone over and over. Marcus had called 31 times. No voicemails, no texts, just a digital knock on a door he no longer had a key to. He didn't understand silence as consequence. He always took it as negotiation, but there was nothing left to trade. I checked the mail and found the last of the title confirmations had arrived. Final approval for the transfer of the Oglethorpe property to my personal trust. No company entanglement. No dual signatures. Just mine. 28 years after I bought it, it was back where it started. By the time I returned to my laptop, I'd already decided. The last trust Marcus remained listed on, the educational fund I once created for future grandchildren, would be amended next. Legacy was no longer a bloodline. It was a boundary. Now it's Tuesday morning, and I'm sitting in the sunroom of my new Edgewood condo, one hand around a warm cup of coffee. The bank accounts are locked. The assets have been untangled, the damage documented. The folder that held it all, what James once called the quiet archive of betrayal, now sits in my safe, sealed and labeled internal actions closed, November 6, 2025. I won't destroy it. But I won't reread it either. My phone buzzes again. 31 missed calls, all from Marcus. No messages, no apology. Just a pattern of pressure, expecting I'll break the silence first. He still hasn't realized that silence, when earned, becomes protection, not punishment. I don't answer. I stare out past the edge of my building, where the view runs clean over the tops of trees and rooftops, and for the first time in months, I feel something close to still. Not peace, exactly, but something steady, not waiting to be upended. I can finally sit without flinching when a notification pings or a familiar name appears in a subject line. He'll try to reframe the story. He always has. A misunderstanding, a difference in vision. She overreacted, but it's too late for soft edits. The record holds. Paper carries weight. And this time, I made sure my name isn't just on the title. It's on the terms.